Perfect.
All right. I
Looking
think
at the time, we probably should get started.
Yes.
yeah.
Right.
Perfect. So again, I want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to thank each of the panelists for agreeing to participate, and our moderator, Anne, thank you so much for in advance for moderating this session today. We're really excited to talk about data analytics and data science. I would like to remind everyone who's just jumping on the call and joining us right now, if you can mute your mic, that would be appreciated. So this way nobody has to get distracted by any background noise. And there's an opportunity to sort of ask questions. We have a whole list of questions that we're going to be walking through just based on the poll that was sent out and people's responses. But if you have a question that does come up, you can submit them. We'll collect them. We'll ask all the panelists to contribute and we'll send it out. Probably at some point this week or early next week, we'll send this presentation out. It'll include how to reach each of the panelists, as well as the questions that were being asked, and we'll send out the recording as well, the video as well as the audio version of it. So everyone who's participating or who asks has an opportunity to get this recording as well, and you can pass it to your colleagues. So with that, I'm going to ask Anne to kick us off and start things on her end.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thank you so much to Alan and Matthew for organizing this important panel in a topic that I think sometimes gets overlooked. Ordinarily, I would introduce each of the panelists with a line or two about them, but we only have an hour today, so I'm going to simply give you their names and let you know that their contact information will be circulated to you afterwards, and you can find them all on LinkedIn. There you can see who they are. So I'm also following Alan's lead and thanking in advance Matthew, founder of Donor Science Consulting, Alan, Vice President, Nonprofit League, Environics, Celeste Bannon Waterman, Partner and Lead, Research and Analytics, KCI, Saren Batch, Partner and Developer, East Fund Development Software, Randy Malik, Insights Analytics, CEO, Scott Rosencrantz, Principal Consultant and Director of Data Analytics, Futurist Group, and Bill Jacobs, founder of Analytical Ones LLC. And I hope for those of you, I know in case your video's not working, you now know who's on the panel, although I spoke quickly. So just to kick things off, and this is an open question for any panelist who wants to start. For nonprofits who haven't dabbled with analytics before, what's the first thing they should consider to make their fundraising more efficient? And I'll just open it up to the panel for who would like to go first.
I'll go first.
Thank you.
It's Sharon Batch, and we wrote a book about this because we've worked with charities for 30 years. We've been unbelievably frustrated at the lack of information or the lack of I guess, the lack of interest in managing their most important asset, and that's their data. And I think in order to make your fundraising operations more efficient, the first thing is they have to organize. Looking for files, not having proper information on your donors, all of that undermines the charity and puts it at risk. And as a result of that, people leave exhausted, stressed, dissatisfied. Their outcomes are not what the charity needs or expects. And I think those problems are very solvable. But I've heard people say, well, we can't do that. Can't is not in my vocabulary, and it shouldn't be in any charities either. When you consider they bring in between, now I've heard these numbers, 6 to 22 billion a year, and I don't know if that's quite correct, but I know the 6 is. You can't afford to have a group of people that run by the seat of their pants. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of charities do it. And it's time for change.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And I love how you've given a really clear level set for just maybe a bit of what's kind of the state of the status quo in terms of, I heard you talking about maybe records that are incomplete and the frustration staff can call. I just wonder if any of our other panelists have maybe a concrete example. Sharon's really done a great job of explaining kind of the nature of the problem. Does anyone want to talk about maybe what's the first thing you want to consider to make your fundraising more efficient using analytics?
Yeah, I would.
Oh, go ahead, Matthew.
Please.
Okay, thank you so much. So the most basic thing that a nonprofit should do if they haven't dabbled with analytics before is to categorize their donors according to their donation activity. So we call this database segmentation. The three basic dimensions by which we can categorize donors by their donations are recency, frequency, and monetary. So this very simply refers to one, how recently the donor gave to the nonprofit, two, how many gifts the donor gave in the most recent period, and three, how much money was given in the most recent period. Knowing this info not only gives you a better handle over how well your nonprofit is performing at its most vital function, but it also enables you to communicate with your donors differently on the basis of their donation activity. For example, if you find you have a lot of donors who last gave to you several years ago, i.e. lapsed donors, you can send them a charitable appeal that tells them that you've noticed it's been a while since they last gave, and convince them that your nonprofit is making a big impact and thus they should give again. And that would be my answer.
Thank you. So I hear you talking about maybe, here's some first steps. I wonder if any other panelists have something first they think people should consider in terms of analytics.
I do.
Or anything to add, please.
Yeah, I would focus on the operational metrics. At Insights Analytics, we have a top 10 list when it comes to CRM that we think should be focused on. And number one is customer lifetime value, also referred to as customer lifetime revenue. This is the total projected amount of money that a customer or donor, in this case, will spend during the course of their relationship with your organization. Number two is the customer acquisition cost, or CAC. This is the cost per lead. And this allows you to measure the average spend per your lead generation efforts. Number three is the first response time. This measures the length of time that it takes to respond after a target gets in touch with your organization for the first time. Number four would be the length of sales or donation cycle. And this is the average period of time between when you create a prospect in your CRM platform and when that opportunity is actually closed. Number five would be the percentage of customers or donors who result from your marketing. And this reveals the percentage of new business that was generated from your new marketing and is especially helpful metric for your CRM analytics. But it can also determine the overall impact of your entire promotional efforts. Six would be your retention rate. Seven would be the return on ad spend. Obviously in times like this, you should be advertising. Oftentimes organizations look to cut when actually they should be looking to actually invest. And obviously looking at these types of metrics are very important when it comes to their CRM. And then number eight actually is a net promoter score. This measures your customer or donor loyalty to your organization or brand, and it answers the question, how likely would you be to actually recommend our organization to others? And then number nine would be recouping the cost of this customer or donor acquisition. And this indicates the length of time taken to repay the cost of that customer or donor acquisition to our organization. And this number is going to differ greatly from organization to organization. And then number 10 obviously is going to be margin. And there's many ways to calculate that margin. It's going to obviously vary very differently depending on the organization, their operating costs, and all of the things that stack into what it takes to operate that organization. We did write an in-depth article on our blog at insightsanalytics.com that covers all of these in great detail that can be referenced, but that would be our answer, is focus on the operational metrics, and that's our top 10 list.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being so thorough. And what I like about this is that I'm conscious we have organizations, not profits, from a range. And so I think some of, Sharon laid the groundwork. I think Matthew's given us a very simple for maybe a smaller or a less sophisticated organization. And then I think, Randy, you've done a great job of maybe an organization that's a little bit a little bit further ahead that maybe has a little bit more capability, but still obviously very, very green in this area. I wonder if any other panelists have any thoughts?
I would just add to that.
I'd like to.
Please. Thank you, Alan.
I would just add, taking a step back and adding a little bit to what Sharon said, looking at really the first steps is your database. So just looking at how clean your database is, how the records are situated, and what you're pulling from is really key before getting into a lot of the stuff that Randy and Matthew spoke about, and some others may speak about. It's just really looking at the database itself, because a lot of organizations, a lot of charities have volunteers typing things in, and sometimes it goes incorrectly. Sometimes the methodology of where you put things in your database, whatever database you're using, whether it's Blackbaud or Salesforce, whatever it may be, things change as staff change as well. So just I would start with taking a look at your CRM and your database, just to make sure that the information you're housing and you're looking at to look at the top 10 list or start to segment is really clean. And so at least you have a good starting, a good foundation that you're laying there. So
Great.
Garbage in, garbage out is what we say at Environics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
I'm sorry, I think I heard
great.
someone else
Point.
wanting to chime
Celeste
in.
here, I'm jumping in on you. And,
Yay.
Whoa. And so I agree with a lot of what my fellow panelists have said, but if I can kind of take a different spin on it, I think it's really important for analytics to be aligned with and support the overall organizational strategy, whatever you're doing. So if you haven't really dabbled with analytics, I think it's important to stop and think about what are we actually trying to accomplish here, and make sure that you're picking the metric or the technique or the approach that aligns with that. And when I look right now, I mean, April 3rd, as we record this, it's all about stewardship is what I would really emphasize for charities. If we're thinking about what it's important to be doing, it's really important to be talking to your best donors, making sure we're thanking them, making sure we're keeping them close. And especially if you've got any new donors coming on, if you're one of those organizations I'm thinking about right now who are getting kind of an influx of new donors, maybe the hospitals or social service charities who are actually seeing people voluntarily give in response to this crisis, stewardship, and making sure that you are segmenting and focusing your best resources on people who are going to have the most likelihood of sticking with you for the long term, but also any new donors, critical. So analytics can support that in a variety of ways, but tie it to strategy, and it's so much easier to get your basically your project approved.
Thank you so much, Celeste.
I
And I will say for those who are listening in, I'm going to be bold and take moderators' prerogative here and note I'm actually a fundraiser, and one of the things in Celeste's note is we're in an interesting time where, depending on the sector you're in, you may be besieged with new donors, or things may be kind of quiet for you right now. But stewardship, that link of analytics and your strategy and stewardship, I'm certainly experiencing in my world as well. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. But
Can I comment before we leave that, Anne, please?
Sharon.
I think the statement was fundraising operations more efficient. I would say more effective is also a very good word. And when you talk about stewardship, we're talking about relationships and what you know about your donors. And it's been my experience, and I can say I've worked with hundreds of different charities and fundraisers. The idea of capturing data in a form that's actually usable, I don't think is in the headlights. And I think people talk a lot about this, but unfortunately, it doesn't happen. And I've worked with fundraisers that I thought were pretty credible, and then we got a chance to look in their data, and there was nothing there and nothing that made any sense, and certainly nothing that was well organized. And I would question why this is happening. And I think the reason is that nobody says, hey, this is your job, do it. And I think a lot of fundraisers feel that using the software is sort of a clerical thing, and it's not. And I find this one of the largest problems in the charitable sector, because as you have people come and go, there's no information. I wrote about a high value donor. He was the chancellor of the University of Alberta, given a large gift to a charity here, fortunately not one of my clients. And the whole fundraising group quit. So he went to see how this donation that he'd given for this project was doing. And nobody could give him an answer. I mean, to me, if I was working with a charity like that, I would back away and right away, and I'd say, hey, I'm going to put my money where it's worthwhile. So I think charities have to be much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe you can help me here.
I
But
think you said
responsible.
effective, I think was the word you started with. And I think that's important, kind of effective and perhaps disciplined. And that leads really beautifully, I think, Sharon, you're talking about effectiveness and you're talking about using your data and using your database, not just as some clerical role. We know that data also plays a really important role. I'm going to move on to our next question. We know data can play a really important role. So for those on the phone who aren't able to see the next question, it's what data can be used to help a nonprofit communicate better with its donors. So Celeste talked a little bit about strategy. Obviously, the hygiene question's really important in this area as well. And of course, we hit on Randy's point in terms of lifetime value, that maybe you want to start with your closest donors first. I want to open this up, but I do want to give first right and offer. We haven't heard yet from Scott and Bill, so I don't know if you want to start off on that. Give your 2 cents worth on this, perhaps.
Yes, I'd love to answer this one, and actually briefly talk about the last question as well. I think while Perfect. It's important to have clean data, the advances of artificial intelligence and predictive modeling can account for any of that incorrect, inaccurate data. And also, we provide a machine learning model that collects data on a regular basis, which allows time for the nonprofits to maintain, update, clean their data while they're using our model. But it also, the benefit of jumping on it now as opposed to waiting until you have a perfect data set, which is few and far between, is that you get the benefit of initial accuracy of the model. And then the increased accuracy of using machine learning model will only start to come into play sooner by jumping into that now. And the advisory board did a white paper last fall, I believe, about the importance of having a grateful patient program or a program such as that. An immediate program is better than a perfect program. So jumping into it now and making use of the results that you have, the data that you have, while taking that side step to clean your database and work on that, you'll still be able to build those relationships immediately while not putting off any fundraising priorities while you're putting a pause to get your database in order. But in terms of the data used to help a nonprofit communicate better with its donors, I think it's important to know who are the donors you want to communicate, right? Who are the ones that, like Randy mentioned, the high lifetime value, who has the most engagement with you and are worth your time, worth your investment, and not going to spend your major gift officer's time in trying to communicate with them and build a relationship if it's not going to turn into anything worthwhile down the road. So it's looking at who has higher levels of engagement, who wants to build that relationship with you, and then who's been connected with you through the ups and downs of your organization to continue those relationships.
Great, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just pausing. Please, was that an I want to speak, or that I wanted to see if someone else wants to talk on this topic of data and how to communicate better with donors?
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. I think, just adding on to that, I think for some organizations, what that means really is those, high customer lifetime value segments, really, how do you activate those segments is the big question that a lot of these organizations have. And what they're really looking to do is communicate with them, and communicate them in a meaningful way, in a scalable way, and in a personalized way. And so the two biggest channels that we've seen at Insights Analytics with our clients have been email and paid search advertising. And those two channels within paid search advertising have been Facebook and Google. And so the two ways that we've seen organizations doing that The stats that I'd like to share is that a lot of organizations, what we've seen from a B2B perspective is that the upper funnel has been 40 to 60% of revenue funnel we've seen coming through email. Now, again, that's going to vary very differently from industry to industry, but email and personalized email, again, is a very, very effective channel. And being able to leverage the data in a CRM platform to do that, again, leveraging this information, being able to use personalized, pieces of information like first name, the URL, a relevant want for what that target or that individual might have and what is meaningful to them, and how you message, that information to them and that recipient with a very distinct call to action. Those are the things that are going to get results in an email. When it comes to the other side of that equation, the paid search side, what we're seeing is activating audiences, taking your high value segments in either your CRM or your existing paid search channels, and creating these custom audiences, building these audiences and creating other lookalike audiences in your marketing channels so that you can find other high value segments out there and advertise to them so that you can say, well, I already have this really high value segment of donors that we already know really love us, they value us, they're already donating to our organization, and we know that they support us. We need to find other people out there who look just like this audience, and how can we leverage these platforms who can allow us to find so many more people just like them? It's doing that. And so being able to leverage your CRM data, finding those audiences out there is the way to do it.
Thank you. And this leads so beautifully to the next question, because one of the possibilities, a lot of people are saying right now, is, fundraising doesn't end. Fundraising has many components, and fundraising includes stewardship. Fundraising can also include identification. And so I'm just wondering if one of the other members of the panel, this is a time where for some charities, as I've heard and noted and has been noted, people are really hopping sideways to get out there, overwhelmed. Healthcare organizations, frontline social service charities. There are also organizations where maybe things are a bit quiet right now, and so you're doing the stewarding of your donors, as Celeste suggests. But this may be also an opportunity, I think Matthew kind of alluded to this, where you can start to look at who are some of your best prospects. So I'm wondering if anyone would like to tackle how can a nonprofit find new prospects to sign up for monthly giving, or new major gift prospects if they're a bit more quiet in their shop.
Can I actually, I was going to say if I can answer the question before in terms of data, before we get into this one, just really quickly, because I think we've talked about a bunch of different lookalikes and different sort of practices. But in terms of data, and I get asked this from the EA perspective, what data is available? One, I want to make sure that people understand in Canada, the best types of data that is available is at the lowest type of data is at the 6-digit postal code, where in the US, so for any friends here from the US, you can get data at the household level. And in terms of data that's available, that speaks to a lot of what we're going to be talking about, and kind of has been mentioned, how do you best connect with your donors, steward your donors? There's a lot of great psychographic data out there that really speaks to the core of people. So core of Canadians and Americans, what do they believe in? What kind of causes, what's their sort of perspective on the world? And that's some great data that a lot of people kind of hop over, and they get into more media data and other behavioral data that's out there that really, I think we should spend the time to focus in on when it's right for an organization, so they can really tap into the hearts of, why does someone believe in the environment or believe in international causes, and how does that make them tick, and how will that make them respond both from a textual perspective as well as from a visual perspective? So there is a lot of great data out there. I think it's just a matter of finding organizations and what that data looks like, and at what legal limit or geography it is. So obviously, Facebook at the one-to-one is a little different. But I think I just want to make sure that we answer that first before we get into this, because there is actual data out there that people can use to really utilize in their creative and, again, sort of their messaging. And I'll let someone else answer number 3.
Well, maybe I'll jump on that, Alan, and I'll take your answer and parlay it into the next question, because I was going to actually call back to that, because when we think about how do we find new prospects for whatever it is, monthly giving, major giving, whatever it is, what I always say is it's really important to understand the characteristics of people who are doing that now. So if you have monthly donors now, if you look at them and you look at them compared to your other donors and then compared to the broader population and understand how they're different. And your own data is really key on that, like what you have on them in your database. But other sources of data, like Alan talked about, can really augment and help you understand better. You know, are my monthly donors more likely to be older? Well, yes, but are they more likely to live, you know, in different types of areas? And they get into some of that psychographic data that Alan talked about. That can be really helpful to help you think about your messaging, but also your segmentation and targeting, whether you're looking at, you know, okay, then, you know, my monthly donors look like this, so I'll try my other donors in my database, or if I want to do something broader, having that understanding of the profile is really the first step, is what I would say. And it's a great activity people can be doing right now if you do have some time as analytics or research folks, while your major gift officers are working the phones, hopefully.
Great.
So I'd like to build off of Celeste's answer, which philosophically I 100% agree with. And I just want to say, you know, if a nonprofit has been dutifully recording information about their donors in a proper donor database, then there's so much that you can learn about those characteristics that Celeste mentioned. And I mean, the profile for monthly donors or major donors are going to be somewhat different. And in fact, you can use those characteristics in the pursuit of what some may know of as predictive modeling. And predictive modeling is a practice of teaching a computer the characteristics of, you know, either monthly or major donors or any other sort of charitable behavior of interest, so that we can find existing donors who fit the profile but never gave in such ways before. So the end goal of predictive modeling is to generate numerical scores that enable you to prioritize your approach to those existing donors, so that the first people who you ask to convert to, you know, monthly or major or membership or whatever, are those who best fit the profile. This way, your nonprofit wastes much less time and effort, and you get a higher return on investment. So you do need to have a few key ingredients in place to have a successful modeling project experience. You know, number one, you need a good modeler, whether it's in-house or an external consultant. And with that in hand, number two, you need to compile as much information as possible on each of your donors, as much as your donor database allows, and hand all of that info over to the modeler. Now, the modeler doesn't care about, you know, the first and last names of your donors. The modeler doesn't care about the street addresses of your donors. Everything else, though, your modeler definitely cares about. Finally, most importantly, you need consensus. If your colleagues don't see the value in the project, it really doesn't matter if the modeling job was amazing, because it'll go to waste. But at the end of the day, you'll be amazed at how much it uncovers donors who are ready and willing to convert, who you previously would not have considered before. And that's my answer.
Great. Thanks so much, Matthew. Scott, I just wonder if you've got something. We haven't heard as much from you, and I just want to be sure that this isn't like one of those Democratic debates on TV where like some guys never get to talk.
No, I appreciate that. And I was just going to jump in on Matthew's and Celeste's comments. And it is important, obviously, predictive modeling and identifying those profiles of your current donors. But I think before, a lot of organizations just rely on their CRM data because it's what they have access to, right? It's very easy to get their hands on that and use that as the prime resource of data to build these predictive models around. And then if they go above and beyond that, they'll turn to that psychographic data, other data sets that you can buy. But I think really what they're missing is looking at or exhausting the data sets from other departments throughout their entire organization. So for example, universities, looking at any of that alumni data or the academic data, the volunteer data, the sports club data. There's a number of different data sets that are not specifically focused on donors, but focused on the constituents that have that engagement level and that relationship with the organization. And that's really what is key in identifying your best donors, because your donors, again, going back to a university model, donors don't give to a university because they like the logo or they like the name or they like the sports club. They give because they had a great experience there, right? And you can get a better sense of what were those great experiences by looking at other data sets collected throughout the organization, compiling them all together, and really build that robust data set and that robust profile of who your most engaged donors are to find more like them.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bill, I want to give you last word if you want it.
Bill's not here.
Okay, well, then that would explain why I haven't seen him yet.
And
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'd like to mention something about the communication side,
sure.
because I think communication with your donors is really, really important. And this is something our clients have come and asked us about. And one of the areas, of course, is why they give. All right. So we have donor interest. We also have the fund they allocate to. Those are two sources. Others are characteristics or qualities. But one of the areas that we've started looking at, and there's a company in Toronto, Envoke, that we've been talking to. They're an email company, but rather than sending out these massive emails with all kinds of blah, blah, blah in it, you can focus specific interests. So you can target your people by areas they're actually interested in, rather than overwhelming them with too much and they simply don't read it. Another area that we talk about is that the thank you letter. I hate thank you letters personally, but the thank you letter, and especially to organizations, rather than sending the thank you letter or along with the thank you letter, why not send a terrific article that they can use in their newsletters or post to their employees? There's a whole new audience of people that become potential donors. But not only that, it's a plus for the organization as well, because their employees sit down and say, you know, I work for a pretty good organization. We met a fellow a couple of years ago. We were in the Galapagos, and he was a very interesting guy. He's from down in the States. They make hand wipes and so forth for the medical area. Probably pretty busy right now. But he does a lot in terms of sponsoring organizations, and they sponsored their I don't know what they call it in the States, but it was like a football team, and they call it brats and sodas. We call them hot dogs and pop. But every year, this group would give the Wiggly Piggly a little letter saying thank you very much. Instead, he put a big banner up, 18 feet by 12 inches, and all the team members signed it. Where did they put it? They put it at the front door of the organization along the wall. Every customer that walked in there knew something about this, the organization that they were now supporting and buying their groceries at.
Nice.
Every family member.
Nice.
And, you know, I think charities need to be charitable themselves and not always look for the grasp, but also look for the give. And I think that's a very important part of developing a positive relationship and really moving out. We've got other clients that do video clips. You know, if it's an automotive company, put the video clip up with permissions, of course, so they can put it in.
Thank you so much. I think I love the give, not just
Business.
grasp, which I think harkens back to that communications question we just asked a little while ago.
That was the communications,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it's very important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very important. I couldn't agree more. So one of the things that we've been talking about that's been a bit of a thread running through this has been talking about, you know, Alan, you raised the the garbage in, garbage out problem. Sharon, you have talked about this. Randy, I think you also mentioned it. In fact, I think everyone's mentioned it. So I'm just wondering, I want to give a chance, maybe Sharon, to someone who hasn't had a chance to speak yet, about what are some steps a nonprofit could take to clean up the data in its CRM. And I'm wondering if one of the other panelists has some ideas or some thoughts.
From the EA perspective, there's a couple of things that we suggest to our clients. One is, depending on the size of your database, if it's a couple of hundred or just a couple of thousand, there's an opportunity to kind of have a volunteer or someone on the staff kind of go through it and potentially look at the NCOAs, so National Change of Address, and work with Canada Post or some other companies to kind of see if there's a cleanup. If it's a much larger one, there are providers. So again, Canada Post, there's a sister company that we use that provide free reports, and that's actually one of the reasons I really truly love them from the not-for-profit perspective. You can get a free report, take your database, run it through their systems, and provide a free report on what's actually really good about your database, what's actually not really good about your database, and then make smart decisions based on that. So there's a bunch of companies that do that, and I would kind of look at those to really make the right decision for your database and the cleanup. And again, I think somebody has mentioned this before, it's what's the objective, and making sure when you're looking to clean up your database, you're doing it in the areas or kind of looking at it from the strategic standpoint of what's my objective? Is it for a mailer? So, deceased lists and addresses are really important. Let's make sure that's cleaned up. Whether the gender or the birth date or other things that we collect is valid, that's maybe less on the priority list, and let's push that down. But really take a look at what's your objective and kind of go from there. But there's a lot of great services up there that I or anyone probably on the panel can kind of share. But I would really go with the ones that also have some free reports, so you can make the right judgment call without just saying, my database is wrong everywhere, I need to do X, Y, and Z, and then spend thousands of dollars where it's probably not needed. So from the not-for-profit perspective, that's probably what I would do as a first step when it comes to a CRM.
Thank you. I love that link of data hygiene, but also that linking it back into strategy. I feel like I heard someone else wanted to add something.
That was Randy. Yeah, I would just add, I think it really depends on the size of your organization and the size of your CRM database, and how big of a data hygiene issue you might have. I mean, I did hear earlier garbage in, garbage out. I see it as usually a three-step process. Number one, stop entering data poorly. So first of all, fix the issue. If you do have data entry issues, stop them right there, get to the bottom of it, and find out where the data is coming in a way that it is creating data hygiene problems. And usually what that is whether you're using a CRM platform, if it is, something like a Salesforce or a HubSpot or some other tool, chances are, you can create data validation on certain fields where you can leverage drop downs, you can leverage certain things that only, if there are people who are entering free form text, put some rules around it. So that usually will start, putting some, process around that so that you don't have those issues going forward. The second thing is, for larger organizations, much larger organizations, you might be looking at a big problem. And so if you have, multi-million or billion row CRM databases, you're going to be looking at a data governance team, right? Where, you have data dictionaries, you have, you want a data architect involved. And you actually want, hierarchies to your data to ensure that it is clean, because this is probably a database that is worth, multiple millions of dollars to you, and it's extremely valuable. On the other hand, and the other side of that spectrum, look, if it's hey, it's not nearly that big, it might just be a small data project, right? And so you can get away with saying, look, we just need to hire a data analyst or maybe a DBA. And maybe it's a 40-hour, 60-hour project, and we just need someone to come in, check out our data, do a quick assessment, and just do some data entry cleanup. And it's that simple.
Great. Thanks so much, Randy.
Can I add to that, Anne?
Sure, briefly.
I think what the big problem is they don't train their staff. And I think the charity itself needs to have guidelines, and this is how we do it here, period. Because I think what happens is you get all these different people coming in and going out. They have no idea what they're doing or what the impact of what they're doing is. You get companies in there 4 and 5 times. You can't sit down with them and talk about their donations because, of course, they're distributed over multiple records. I think training, I think consistency, I think having a good set of guidelines on your expectations. A fundraiser who likes to use a spreadsheet versus a CRM is risking the sustainability of the organization. I don't think you need people like that. And I think performance reviews are really important.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you.
And Celeste here,
yes,
can I jump
Celeste.
in with 2 quick topical pieces?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So again, prefacing this as this is April 3rd, I agree with what my fellow panelists have said, but I think there's a couple things charities can be doing right now that I would urge them to do in the next few weeks. First of all, if they are one of those organizations that are getting a lot of new donors coming in, and I've heard this from some of my clients, that they're seeing donors given to them they've never seen before. First of all, double check and make sure those aren't duplicates, because I do think people might be moving quickly, as we all are right now. And what you want to make sure you do is, if this is a former donor returning to you, that you steward and acknowledge it appropriately. So keep on top of those. The second thing is, if your fundraisers are doing that stewardship, I've really been beating the drum on, try and get them while they're doing those personal calls and that outreach to then clean up those records of your top donors, because that is so critical. So thinking about, is the right phone number in here, is the right email, like all those kind of basic stuff. You should really know your top prospects well, and this is a great chance to do that if you're not currently actively asking for money.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm finding, because as I say, I'm a frontline fundraiser and I'm calling major donors, and
yes,
I'm saying, how are you? And people are saying, no, how are you? And like they really mean it. It's quite a moment. It's quite a moment.
There's never been a better time to pick up the phone and talk to donors, actually.
Yes, absolutely. I'm just a little conscious of time. So I'm just going to move us on to our question number 5. And you guys have been doing such a beautiful job of, if you thread something from a previous remark, please feel free. You don't need me to stop you and say, no, we're on question 5. You can't thread this back to question 3.
Thanks, Anne.
Alan, I'm kick that person out of the group. So the current question is, what can a nonprofit do to diagnose problems with a particular campaign that is showing flagging performance? And, this is an interesting question, because we're, as Celeste just said, we're in such an interesting time. So I'm interested in hearing, and Scott, I'm tempted to throw this over to you because you've got such a strong data analytics background. But you're
wonderful.
Welcome to take a pass, because we're in this funny world, results that someone may have been looking at March 7th, and depending on the kind of charity they are, their reality on April 3rd might be very different. But any early thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think obviously it comes back to the data, right? But you need to understand that there's a number of different ways that the campaign could be showing up as poor performance, right? Is it the messaging that isn't appropriate or communicating what your needs? Is it the campaign itself, the objective for the campaign? Does it not resonate with the community, right? Or is it the fundraisers that aren't, taking the initiative or following through? So there's a number of different ways, and the data will be able to show that. But I think that if it does go back to the objective, and now's not the time for the community to support something that you're trying to raise dollars for, now's a perfect opportunity to pivot. With everything that's changing, prioritize the needs of the current moment, right? A lot of our clients are in healthcare, and we're telling them that if you haven't already done an emergency fund, now is the time to do it. I'm speaking with some clients that raised $10 million in 3 days because they're getting out in front of this. And Celeste, I think you made a point earlier, now's the perfect time to be connecting with your donors, right? In a crisis, everyone wants to be supported. So they are asking about how you're doing as a nonprofit and not necessarily the needs that they have. So if something isn't working for you in a campaign, take this opportunity, pivot, and make sure that what you're doing is focusing on the current needs and not tone deaf to the community as a whole or the community you're serving.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to weigh in? Maybe Matthew or Randy. I haven't heard from you in a little while, but feel free to take a pass if this isn't your kettle of fish.
I would just add testing. You know, split testing is something that I think is really, really underrated. I really don't see enough of it. You know, testing and optimization, unfortunately, is just something that I still don't see enough of today. You know, I think if you want to improve performance, you have to split test. When you have, you know, multiple variations of something, you have the ability to compare. And to create variations and versions. And unfortunately, usually what happens is people find out too late that the performance of, you know, a campaign or something that they're running live is not doing well enough. And they don't have enough different proof points to find out why. And so when you have, you know, an A/B or a multivariate test, and you've done it, you know, live, or you started out with those testing versions, you have those versions live that you can start turning off the, you know, the poorly performing versions, and you can optimize real time. And you don't have to go back and figure out when it's too late. And so I would say testing is definitely something that, you know, people should be doing a lot more of right now.
Great, thank you. We're getting close to the end here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the last question. And I'm going to ask each of you to reply just briefly to the question and then any final remarks, but I am going to kind of keep moving you along. So I just want to be sure that everyone gets to have a chance to have their last word. So I'm going to start with question number 6, which is, what are the best resources for learning how to leverage data science with donor data? And I'm going to ask Matthew as the co-host to be up. And I'm going to ask Scott to be on deck so that we're sure that we can kind of keep rolling. So Matthew, any parting thoughts or want to answer this question or both?
Oh, I love this question. So my first answer to this question is going to be to copy and paste some links into the chat. I have compiled a list of resources, both like a Udemy course and some ebooks, some of them paid and some of them free. And you'll notice some of them are very oriented towards this statistical computing language R, which is free, which is the only reason why I'm recommending it. So yeah, feel free to take advantage of any of these resources, especially my pal Kirk Schmidt, who teaches a course on fundraising metrics. Finally, what I want to say is I've actually in the past provided direct instruction to organizations who want hands-on consultation on like how they can better understand and perform predictive modeling by themselves. So I do consider myself to be a resource in this regard.
Thank you so much, Matthew, and thank you again for organizing this. Scott, I'm going to ask your thoughts either on this question or as a wrap up, and Celeste, I'm putting you on deck, please.
Thanks, Anne. Yes, I agree with Matthew. I mean, there's so many free resources out there, and especially now when people are home and, you know, museums are putting up free videos of their curated events. So there's so many organizations that are supplying information like this. YouTube, I mean, there's tons of information on YouTube, tons of courses that you could take for free, or people talking about data analytics at all different types of levels, and some specifically for fundraising. I saw Matthew did put some great resources up there so far. I use datasciencecentral.com a lot. And then Coursera has some great courses as well. So tons of those classes to take from home. Udemy, another great resource. But there's so much on YouTube for free that I would usually turn to someone, or recommend someone turn there first.
Thanks so much, Scott. I really appreciate it. Celeste, you're up, and Sharon, you're on deck, please.
Thanks. I agree with a lot of those resources were on my list too and been mentioned. I'm just going to give an additional shout out. If you're old school like me and you like a book, I'll post this. It's Data Science for Fundraising. This is my current fave that I've been reading. It uses R. Matthew and I are both acolytes of the cult of R. So you have to pay for it, but it's reasonable. The other thing I'm going to say is there's lots of folks, and Matthew, you're absolutely right. The training I think can be very helpful if you're looking for someone to give you a bit of coaching on it. We do that as well at KCI, but there's also the opportunity, I would say, to learn from peers and colleagues that I think is really helpful. There are some online forums and discussion groups if you're into this to look into. And I also would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Kevin McDonnell's blog, which the name just suddenly I'm drawing a blank, so I'll post it in the comments in a second too.
Oh, thanks so much, Celeste.
It used to be Cool Data, but now it's Cool Ops blog.
Thank you. That's why I was doubting myself, because I knew it had changed. Thanks, Matthew.
Okay. So Sharon, we're very short on time. So Sharon, just for 1 minute, and then Randy, you're up on deck, please.
All right.
I would recommend. Oh, I'm sorry. Go for it.
Okay. What we've chosen to do with our software is add a lot of the analytics in. We've seen a lot of the analytical reports that are out there. And so we've put in RFM, we've put in retention reports, we've put in all sorts of comparisons, and they're simple to run and they're simple to understand. And I think that's something that, you know, analytics can be very complex. And I think for smaller charities or mid-sized charities, it can be quite a challenge, especially if you don't have the staff to do it. But I do agree. I think analytics are really, really important. And I'm hopeful that everybody will take an opportunity to look at the resources that have been mentioned. And I've enjoyed this conversation very, very much.
Thank you so much. So Randy, you're going to get the, I think, second to last word.
All right.
Just for a minute.
Yeah, I would recommend the Ultimate Data and Analytics Training Bundle on educba.com. It is a fantastic resource. It's one of the resources that we use. We have a lifetime license to it, and leverage it with all of the analysts, data scientists, and resources that we have. Insights Analytics has a network of thousands of data practitioners, and that's really what we do. So when our clients use us for our projects and packages to support them and their data science and data analytics projects and packages, you know, that's what we do. So when we train them, we use EduCBA as one of the resources, and it's a phenomenal resource. So I'm going to post it in the chat so everyone can see that. It has many, many different courses to learn, whether you're a beginner and have never even used an Excel spreadsheet, all the way to learning Python and R.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So just before I turn it over to Alan, a couple of notes that I heard today to close off. I heard give, not grasp. I heard pivot to really prioritize the need of the message in the current moment. I heard stop entering data badly. I heard some great thoughts about segmentation, including segmentation that be quite straightforward. I heard about strategy and thinking about how making sure your data matches your strategy. And before I turn it back over to Alan, I'm just going to, for my own part, thank you for being such a great paddle. I've taken lots of notes as we were talking. And I thank you, Matthew and Alan, for the chance to invite me. And I want to thank Celeste Bannon-Waterman, Sharon Batch, Randy Malik, Scott Rosenkrantz for this opportunity to work with you. And I'm going to turn it over Albert to say I'm Ann Rosenfield. I'm the editor of Hilborn Charity e-News. And I hope we're also a free resource. Would love to hear from you either as subscribers, or I'm always looking for great authors. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our co-host, Alan, for final thoughts.
Well, thank you, Ann. And I'm going to start by saying thank you so much for moderating today's session. I think you did a great job today, and we really appreciate you doing so and jumping in. This was put together quite quickly, so we do appreciate your patience and all that you've done today. I want to also extend a thank you to each and every panelist today. I thought a lot of the comments and what you brought to the discussions were terrific, and I'm sure a lot of people listening in today will agree with me on that. And you guys are a great resource. So answering question number 6 here today, I was just going to say that, there's a lot of great resources sitting around this panel that many of you who are listening in can definitely reach out to, and should reach out to, and should be one of sort of the resources that you guys connect with first. So when you're thinking about this and what to do, especially when it comes to, and I heard a lot about your people's objectives and organizational objectives and how to use data and clean your CRM and all of those other things. I think talking to an expert about how do you take your objectives and map it to what you want to do or have heard about, the shiny tools, I guess, so to speak, in many instances, I would reach out to a resource. And so the panelists here today are some great resources. So thank you, each one of you, for participating. Thank you, Matthew, for being a great co-host. I've really enjoyed putting this together with you. And what I would also close with is that we are going to be having another session that's going to be talking about how do you take all of this, how do you take data and analytics and segmentation and actually put it into work tactically. So from the marketing communication perspective, that will be our next session. We're right now looking at April 29th around noon Eastern time. So please stay tuned and look out for that session as we confirm details as well as speakers. And again, just a reminder, we will be sending out this session. It's been recorded. So we'll be sending out the session with a whole bunch of answers to questions we haven't been able to get to and any questions that have been sort of passed along. And lastly, thank you all for joining us today.